This is the Authority Company Podcast, conversations with leaders that are designing our future. Hola, I'm Joe Pardavila, and my guest today is proof that where you start doesn't define where you end up. Anthony A. Luna grew up on the proverbial wrong side of the tracks and has gone on to become CEO of Coastline Equity and the author of the new book, Property Management Excellence. Once an at-risk youth, Anthony transformed his life through mentorship, values, and a commitment to leadership rooted in service. Today, he's helping redefine property management by putting people first and proving that profit and purpose can work together. Anthony Luna, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
Doing great, Joe. Thanks for having me. Appreciate the time.
Oh, you're very welcome. And, a lot of people sort of find themselves in college or they move out of their parents' homes and that's where they evolve. But you, like me, our backgrounds from the very beginning sort of seeded our future. And in the book, you write about how your story begins where the 110 freeway ends. And so I want to talk about that town of San Pedro and how that's influenced you today. Because like I said, most people maybe forget like their childhood, hopefully, as long as it was good, nothing traumatic happening. But most people is like, yeah, my childhood was good. It's fine. Not much of an impact. But for you and for me as well, it seems like that was a huge driver for the rest of your life.
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate you pronouncing it correctly. Us locally here, actually, we all pronounce it incorrectly. So locally, we call it San Pedro. Even though as a Latino, I know that that's incorrect. But
right.
So I'll call it San Pedro during our conversations. So San Pedro is a small community within LA. And for those folks that aren't super familiar with LA beyond going to Disneyland or going to Hollywood or downtown LA, San Pedro is a very sprawling metropolis, whereas most downtown cities, you have kind of the core of the downtown is where the heart of the city is. That is the complete opposite of Los Angeles. There are many cities or communities or neighborhoods throughout Los Angeles that have their own unique character. And being an immigrant community, each neighborhood has its own flavor culturally, with food, with people, with music. And San Pedro is one of those neighborhoods. It is the furthest south you can go in the city of Los Angeles. Not to be mistaken with calling it South LA. South LA is actually kind of central LA, which is kind of, again, LA is a weird little place, a weird big place. But San Pedro is very much an immigrant community of many migrants from Latino communities or Latino countries, many Croatians. We have the largest Croatian population outside of Croatia. We have the largest population of Italians in California or here in San Pedro. We actually have the Little Italy of San Pedro Little Italy of LA is in San Pedro. And many more migrant communities. And San Pedro is also where the Port of Los Angeles lives. So the number one port that drives the U.S. economy is here in San Pedro. And that is the number 2 port in the world, second to China.
All right, so you give us the geography. So what did all that melting pot of immigrants, different heritages, how did that sort of fuel you early on?
Yeah, very much a working class community. In the prior to me being born, 70s, 80s, was beyond working class, more of a poor community. It was a Navy town. There were Navy shipyards in town. And there was a very large drug and gang issue in San Pedro and across the harbor area of Los Angeles. And that continued, that drug and gang issue continued all through the 90s and into the 2000s. And that was kind of the life I was growing up into. So grew up in a single parent household. Mom raised us, myself, my siblings, and drugs and gangs and alcohol were kind of the norm in our community. And later into elementary school, middle school, and high school, drugs were in our home. My mom was in a long-term relationship with kind of our local neighborhood drug dealer, which was kind of the space I was growing up in. And the place that was my sanctuary away from home and away from the chaos of our community was the Boys and Girls Club. And that's really the place that shaped who I was as a leader, morally, ethically, kept me safe physically and emotionally, and really was the driver of who I would become later in life.
Yeah, you write about it in the book, The Boys and Girls Club, the impact, and obviously it's impacted millions of kids over the last, half century. And, that's sort of where you learn from mentorship. You kind of laid the playing field there of like, the home life. I was not getting a lot of mentorship at home. So tell me about some of those early mentors that were like, oh shit, there's like adults that care about people and do good things and go out of the way. and do good things. And what was that like? Was that almost like an awakening for you where like you just didn't know how humans operated?
Yeah, if I were to go through the list of mentors from Boys and Girls Club, we need far more than an hour together, Joe. But I think the two that really come to mind were, I mentioned in the book that kind of the mom and dad of our teen center, kind of in who we saw as kids as the mom and dad figures in our lives were Hilda and Leo, and they were the director and assistant director of the Boys and Girls Club. And Hilda was the staff person, the director of the club that was teaching us all leadership skills and what it meant to be ethically and morally right as a leader and how to speak up for our community and how to find our voice. And it was never about her picking an issue or picking a problem for us to focus on. It was her helping us identify what are those things that are those pain points in your community, that are the pain points at school that you want to learn to advocate for and change in your community, and really teaching us how to be change makers, as early as 12, 13, 14 years old. And Leo was, for many of us, including myself, the first male role model that we could look up to that looked like us, sounded like us, listened to the same music as us. But strangely enough, we couldn't figure out why Leo had never been to jail or prison, because for most of us, that was like the rite of passage as a young man was, at some point, even if I know I want to be a good person, I have to go to jail or prison because that's what every man in our lives had done. So I think Leo, for me especially, was like that first male figure that I could look up to. Was like, okay, there's another way other than what I'm used to seeing with my dad or my stepdad or my, every other man in my neighborhood.
Wow. And I know we can't list all the mentors, but you do write about George Mayer in the book, who coincidentally sort of led you down the career path, which we will get into. But tell me about George and how that led into what you're doing today.
Yeah. So George was a mentor of mine. He was a volunteer at the Boys and Girls Club. He was introduced to the Boys and Girls Club from a family member who was also volunteering on the other coast in New York City, and realized there was a Boys and Girls Club right down the road from his home. And George was a successful businessman in the community that we didn't know. We had no way to know George, because George, again, our window into the world as kids growing up in San Pedro was pretty small. And George was local community member of his local temple that was also in San Pedro. And not until he decided to volunteer did we ever get introduced to George. George exposed us to many of the parts of LA. I mentioned all the different communities of LA that most of us had never seen before because we never left the 110. Again, San Pedro is this little peninsula at the very end of Los Angeles, and LA, we jokingly have this historically terrible metro system that's slowly starting to get better. But we didn't leave San Pedro because there's no way to leave town. And George was taking us to downtown LA and to USC games and to, plays and art festivals, and exposing us to things that I think most kids in LA saw on the weekends with their family on a day-to-day. So that's kind of how our relationship started. And it wasn't until later in life, when I started to get into property management, that I finally realized George had owned a property management business all these years. And I just never knew it. I just knew that George had successful businesses, and that's really all I knew about him as a kid.
That's funny. So let's talk about there, property
Yeah.
management. Because I think, Anthony, you probably say, as a little kid, you probably weren't dreaming of, like, you were dreaming probably to get out of St. Peter, but I want to be in property management or real estate one day.
Yeah.
How did I always love these very like niche sort of
Yeah.
industries and how you fall into it, because obviously it's not like you were following dad into the family business. So tell me about that.
Yeah, not at all. And we joke in the industry that nobody grows up wanting to be a property manager. When you think of, I want to be a firefighter, I want to be a police officer, maybe today you want to be a content creator. Um, Nobody, the idea of what a property manager was fairly limited, for at least from my perspective. It wasn't until I was actually, after college, I was living in Northern California, came back to San Pedro for my dream job at the time. I went to college to explore public service and to work in nonprofits, and that's what I was doing. I was working at the local Boys and Girls Club that I grew up in after coming home from college, and met my now wife, who was a colleague of mine at the Boys and Girls Club, and realized we're both in this nonprofit space. One of us is going to have to probably leave the nonprofit space to, earn a living to start to build a family together. And when she went back to grad school, that's what I did. I started my first kind of property management career and first property management business, and that was my entry into real estate. I knew I wanted to be in real estate and knew I wanted to eventually own real estate. And I felt like that was the way to get introduced to real estate investors and learn the business. And over time, I realized, I really like property management. I really love managing multifamily projects and commercial projects, especially projects that needed work. I loved finding a property that, maybe was distressed and needed some renovation and need some help.
And now there's a niche within the niche there, like you mentioned, there's multifamily, there's commercial. Was there one that you gravitated more towards the most, or did you feel like being, what do they say about having many irons in the fire, diversifying?
Yeah.
What were you doing early on?
So early on, I was doing multifamily. So my first client, first property owner I was ever working with was investing heavily in multifamily in Long Beach here in California. And he was buying distressed, generally historical buildings that had some character to them, that had some age to them. And he was renovating them and turning them into luxury apartment buildings. And that's where I really learned the business and really fell in love with that part of the market. George Mayer, who I eventually joined as his junior partner at Coastline Equity, was 100% commercial. So it wasn't until I joined Coastline Equity that I learned the commercial side of the business. Today, I try to keep a blend of the two.
And so tell us about your current, you've traveled this road, and
Yep.
obviously big part of it is entrepreneurship and starting your own shingle. When did you feel like you were comfortable and you knew you had enough knowledge to do what you're doing today?
That's a loaded question. That's a good question, though, Joe. I think I probably I'm the type of person, probably like many entrepreneurs, that will jump out of the plane as they're building the parachute. And I don't think I had all the knowledge I needed to really get started, but I was willing to take the risk and bet on myself. And luckily, I have a partner both in life and in business that she was willing to jump to. Um, but I was very green when I started my first business, and I was very green when I came on as a partner. And luckily, had a mentor that I had a long-standing relationship with that really saw it more like an apprenticeship and let me teach you the commercial side of the business. And I'll let you. His idea was like, I'll let you stay in multifamily. I really don't want to know multifamily. You keep doing that. I'll teach you the commercial side. And over time, over the last decade, we built a portfolio that was blended between the two product types.
All right, so you joined Coastline Equity in 17. 5 years later, you become the CEO. Tell us about that short amount of time, because for a lot of people, that seems like, wow, that's a blink. You went from, merging companies and starting, then all of a sudden being the CEO. Tell us what those 5 years were like and how they set you up for success in 22.
Yeah, it was a lot of learning. It was a lot of growth. It was a lot of running a lot of different programs all at once. We have a portfolio that blends, that goes from LA County all the way down to North County, San Diego. So pretty wide range. And when I first started with Coastline Equity as a partner, his idea was, I'm going to give you basically the hardest product that we have in the portfolio. I'm going to give you the properties that have a problem, that have an issue, that have active construction. And that was the best decision he could have made for me and for the business, was to give me all the problem children. Let me figure out those parts of the business and figure out where the biggest challenges were. And I think that gave me a nice crash course into the commercial side of the business. The other side of things that I think property managers have an advantage over real estate investors with is, a real estate investor might be buying one or two or maybe three properties, but there becomes a certain point where their capital and their equity, limitations stop them from being able to acquire more properties and learn at a faster rate. Whereas a commercial third-party property manager, I have 150 to 165 clients at any one time that may have one, two, or 10 properties. So I'm able to learn at a speed that's substantially different than your traditional real estate investor. And I think most property managers have that advantage.
That's cool. So it's the best of both worlds, in essence. Because, like you said, there are probably some people who come in there just on the equity side and then the investing side, but don't have that other experience. And you were able to blend those two things, and it's obviously worked pretty well for you over the last few years. And you in your book, even though you talk about brass tacks and facts, you get a little spiritual, and you write about listening to buildings. Is this sort of like the Force? Does it flow through you? Tell me about the practical side of listening to buildings.
I think it is a little bit like the Force, because I know I have staff, that current and former, that joke, like, if I don't go on a property with them, again, that there are parts of the portfolio that I don't see as often as I'd like to, because the team is responsible for that most days. But when I walk on a property, I definitely can see and feel things a little bit differently. This idea of listening to the properties is really about not just trying to find a solution that's going to fix the problem today, but determining what caused that problem to begin with so we can find the real root cause. And there's a story I talk about, or a property I talk about in the book, that's here locally in the peninsula and has a lot of ground movement, like most areas of this area, of this region. And previous property managers would just paint over problems, quite literally, or use quickcrete to kind of like quickly band-aid over issues and paint over them and pretend like they didn't exist. And what that does is just create, these mounds of problems that will eventually resurface and will eventually be 10x the cost and 10x the problem. And really, it's about teaching the team how to really determine what is the property telling you? What are you really seeing and what are you really hearing from not only the physical asset, but from the tenants? What complaints are you hearing from the tenants about when it rains or when it's windy? What are they hearing? What are they noticing? What disturbances do they have in their apartment or in their office? And usually that can start to give us the hints that we need to find the core of the issue.
Wow, it's good. It's funny. I think many of us have lived in multifamily places where, the property management comes and goes. And the culture of property management, you probably know this better than I do, but people who lived it be like, my God, you can go from one property manager that takes a place and makes it feel like you're living in the Ritz-Carlton, and it could be just like a working class, apartment building, to then having a property manager who gives less than two shits. Pardon my French, Anthony. So tell me about this arcane, mysterious world of property management, because we all know about it. We talked about how you kind of fell into it, but like the just the shocks of like the differences, because there's probably nuance differences, but man, when you see it on the ground, like you talk about putting band-aids over bullet holes, like what's up in that world, Anthony?
Yeah, it's the reason I wrote the book. It's the book that I wish I had 10 years ago, is really what it felt like writing. The industry, the gaps are huge, like you described. You have property managers that truly care and truly see the asset like their own. They look at it as if they were the owner. They care about their tenants like they're really their neighbors, because they are, and truly care about the impact that property and their decisions make on the community at large. And then you have the others, and unfortunately, there are a lot of those others in the industry. I talk about that idea of like really wanting to root out those bad apples out of the industry. And I think slowly that is starting to happen. I think we're starting to see more and more property managers that truly understand the impact they can make and the impact that they will make if they truly treat the property and the tenants differently. But in general, the industry's gone through a lot in probably the last 4 or 5 years since COVID. When COVID hit, we lost about 45% of the workforce nationwide, and they never came back. And a big part of that is that the industry it's not an easy world. Most days when you're talking with a tenant, you're only talking with them when there's a problem. So your job is to deal with other people's problems, issues, concerns, leaky toilets. It's a lot of problems and a lot of issues, and it can lead to burnout. And during the days of COVID, when everybody was working from home, or they weren't working from home, they're on the field, a lot of us were working 12, 16-hour days without vacations, because at least here in Southern California, you couldn't really go anywhere anyways. So I think by the time the first kind of open doors happened during COVID, a lot of the industry left and never came back. But that has allowed for this new generation, I think, of property managers, new and old, in terms of age, that are really interested in doing it differently.
That's great. It's funny. So, and back in the day, I worked in radio in New York, and we used to get paid appearances, and we used to go to like store openings and stuff like that, and street fairs, all that sort of goofy stuff. And I remember the worst ones to go to were mobile phone stores, because the only people that go to mobile phone stores are there to complain that their phone's not working. So it was always like the worst. Like I took the money and ran, but like it was like the worst 2 hours of my life. And property management is a bit like that. And you kind of describe it like you don't really know that there's a problem. It's perfect. And something analogous to it is like an offensive lineman in football. No one knows the name of the offensive lineman until they give up a sack. So how does that work in your world where you're only hearing the bad stuff? How do you know when good stuff is happening? How do you know? I mean, Anthony Luna is listening to the building, so that helps. But like, how do most people know that property management is doing good job of property management?
Yeah. And what I described is, I think, how most of the industry works. The way that we approach things and the way I speak about it in the book is that there are ways to absolutely be more proactive and be as preventative as we are with preventative maintenance on a building, we can do the same thing with tenants, where we're checking with them, more organically, whether it's phone calls to check in, monthly phone calls if there is a problem on rent. It's also, doing things like net promoter score surveys and really assessing, is this tenant happy with the building, with management, with the community that we're trying to cultivate, and doing things like resident satisfaction or tenant satisfaction events, and really finding other touch points beyond just the maintenance request or the upset phone call or email, and really being much more proactive than I think historically the industry has been.
Good to know. And this all led you to writing this book, and you outline 5 core values of listening, integrity, owner mindset, quality of life, and legacy. Um, which of these for you has been the hardest to learn and live by? Is there one of those that you could pick and be like, "Oh, that one's hard," or maybe it could be just like a dealer's choice, like for every person it's different. Which of those was the most difficult for you?
Yeah, I think for me, probably the most difficult was the fourth principle of quality of life, and really understanding that, hey, we can't take care of our tenants and our clients effectively if we're not caring for ourselves and our teams. And I think, again, going back to the high burnout and turnover rate that we have in the industry, you described it, having this constant door of property managers. If we're not caring for ourselves and our teams in a way that fills our cup, then we're never going to be able to do the job well. And I can remember the days, and I still fall back into that habit where it's, hey, I didn't realize I've worked 7 days, 12 hours, 12 hours each day. And before you realize it, I'm at burnout. So really making sure that we're trying to deliver a stress-free environment, not only for our tenants and not only for our clients, but for our team as well.
Wow. And you describe, a lot of your work is in Southern California. Southern California is one of those places that it's like you go 500 yards, it's different. You're going to go, there's a ton of multifamily to then a ton of single family. So it's like, when it comes to that sort of diversity of properties, is it harder to kind of maintain when there's so much of it? Because sometimes it really depends on the company, right? If you're a small shingle, you could probably, you got a couple properties, but when you have so many, how much harder does it to sort of keep that culture running where you kind of don't lose track or keep your eye off the ball?
Yeah, it's been a challenge for us even within the product types. And I think that's part of the reason that a few years ago, we stopped accepting new clients that were not multifamily, larger scale apartment buildings and commercial properties, because we found that when we were trying to do the type of property management that we want to deliver on a single family home or a duplex or a triplex, it wasn't as easy to do at scale with all the various product types. I think you can still absolutely, and we have colleagues that are delivering the same principles in smaller product like single families and duplexes, but we've really found a challenge in doing it in every single product type consistently and at the same quality. So for us, it's been about making the decision that, hey, we can really only take clients above a certain size to be able to do it consistently and do it well.
All right. I do work on an affordable housing podcast, so I know enough about the housing industry to be dangerous. And we all know, even if you're not in the industry, know about the housing crunch and all the difficulties with finding homes in Los Angeles. I'm sure it's just as it's harder than ever, and because of the fact that for people who have low paying jobs, they need to live near these sort of high value areas without having to commute 2 hours. So tell me about that balance. And this happens in a lot of large cities where it's like, okay, great. We want to have a restaurant in downtown LA, but like our workers need to go 2 hours because they can't afford to live anywhere near Los Angeles. So tell me about the housing, like just, on the ground there in Los Angeles. What's happening there now?
Yeah, it's not going well at all. And when catastrophes like the fire in Altadena or the fire in Palisades happen, it only makes the problem worse, because the housing crisis just compounds, because now you have affluent neighbors moving into what little housing stock we have available. So, and that has been an issue for many, many years. The city of Los Angeles had a great effort a few years ago to really eliminate a lot of the red tape around affordable housing, and it really created some great momentum for us. And it was an area that my wife and I have continued to advocate for, is really making housing access and affordable housing available at every price range. And in the last few months, the city of LA has kind of pulled back on those efforts and put the red tape back up. So the days of that red tape being gone and being able to get shovels in the ground in 65 days is slowly turning back into 1 year, 2 year, 3 year plans. there are projects that are on the affordable side that sometimes take 7 to 10 years to get built. Um, and with the Olympics three years away from the LA Olympics hitting the area, we need to move faster. We really need to address our housing issues before the Olympics.
And a lot of that too is just like the culture of communities with NIMBYism. Like, I think we all agree that, hey, we need to build more housing, but like, yeah, don't build that one by my house if you don't mind. Um, how since you're in this industry, how much does that? I mean, you mentioned regulations. I think California famously, they're known for movie stars, the coastlines and regulations. But tell me about like NIMBYism and how that plays a part in all these struggles.
Yeah, it's a huge problem across the region. The state of California did put in some laws. They put some laws in place to try to curtail that issue and tried to legislate for each city to have a minimum number of apartments or housing stock that they needed to build with varying success. There have been some cities that have just absolutely refused to comply or are slow walking that decision. Others have embraced it. But without a combination of legislation and curtailing the red tape and making it easier for developers to be able to build the housing stock, I think we're kind of at a standstill where it's going to continue to be this issue of we can't build fast enough. I know we all saw in the media, especially during 4 or 5 years ago during COVID, there was this quote unquote mass exodus out of LA. That was the headlines. That was absolutely not true. We have continued to have an inflow into LA, and that's not stopping. We continue to have a population growth here. And luckily, for the first time in a decade, we did see homelessness trend downwards by about 10%. So it's positive, and we're moving in the right direction. But NIMBYism in general, we've got multiple layers. I know here in the city of LA, we have this structure of neighborhood councils that are a post 90s piece of government that was added, where there are elected neighborhood councils that have a level of decision making around developments, and they're able to shut down developments really easily at the local level. So it's working with those neighborhood councils to make sure we continue to advocate for more housing stock. But you're right that a lot of people are all for housing until it's in their backyard.
Right. And if you don't mind, just humor me for a moment, because I think, you're an expert in real estate. So I would love to get your take on this. Is that if you listen to Gen Z right now, I think there's a sort of general thought of, I'm never going to own a home. There's not going to be home for me. I'm never going to be able to afford a home. The prices are crazy. And then you also see, it's funny on my TikTok, you'll see like these multimillionaires saying, owning a home's a waste. You should rent, and then of course there's the argument of like the impacts of a home has on people and families and stuff like that. So tell me about that and the future of real estate and this broadly accepted notion that kids that are in their 20s right now will never own a home.
I think there are absolutely solutions. I think cities are getting more and more creative. Before we hit record on this podcast, you and I talked a little bit about the home I live in with my family. It's what here in LA what we consider a small lot home, where the footprint is very small. It's less than 1,000 square feet footprint, but it goes up 4 floors, and we love it. We love that we have a rooftop deck. We get to enjoy. We get to watch the sunrise and sunset. So I think there are solutions that cities need to be willing to look at. And I know when we first bought this home, there were 22 homes put on this lot. And there were certainly, looks from neighbors in the community of like, what is that thing? That thing's huge. It's definitely different than the rest of the neighborhood, but slowly we're seeing more and more of these developments that can start to fit into a community really nicely and add some character to the community without completely destroying what's already been there. So I think cities are going to get more creative out of necessity, because I don't think homeownership is dead. And I think there are still going to be people that at some point will decide, hey, I'm ready to put down roots and really, really ready to buy a home. And they're going to need to have different housing stock at different prices.
Yeah, no, that's good. Yeah, I always do laugh at the people that say, don't buy a home. They're usually like multimillionaires with like 9 homes. So I always take, it's like, really? I mean, so why do you own homes? Like, one thing you can almost keep, the one thing that Elon Musk has done is like, I think he couch surfers, like he doesn't even have homes anymore. So there is this idea that you should have to, and I'm a new homeowner in the last, 3 years. And I think some people are made for it, some are not. I mean, the comfort of having a landlord and a super come by and fix things, and then all of a sudden you're the you're the landlord, you're the super. So it's not for everyone. But I think, like you said, We just need to give people the options and the ability to do that thing.
And I think, again, it's probably a scary time for somebody that's looking to buy with interest rates where they are, and no kind of, decrease in sight. At least if my crystal ball is right, we're not heading towards a decrease unless it's artificial. So it's a scary time to try to be a first time home buyer and trying to enter this market right now, especially for all of us, including, I'm guessing, yourself, where we bought at such low interest rates. We're probably not willing to sell anytime soon.
No, no. And it is funny too, though, Anthony. I mean, you probably know the history better than I. If you were to ask like a boomer or a greatest generation person about interest rates, like in the 80s, the interest rates were like double and triple of what they are now. So it's all relative. But yes, we can all be like, oh my God. And then of course people don't realize the reason those interest rates were so low is because of the '08 crash. They were trying to hype up home ownership and selling and building and stuff like that. So it's just, everything happens for a reason, and hopefully it kind of levels off and it maybe lowers a tick so people aren't scared off by it. But at the end of the day, those interest rates, they're going to be part of everyone's life, regardless of what the number is. And you just have to figure out a way to make the math work. And speaking of making it work, you've talked about your wife, and I always wrap up these conversations taking folks behind the dedication of the book. You leave a lengthy dedication to your wife, Lauren. But tell us more about that relationship, why it was important for you to dedicate the book to her, and what impact she's had on you, Anthony.
Yeah. So Lauren, is, like I mentioned earlier, is my business partner in all of our business ventures. She's usually the person that when I give her the crazy idea, she's just asking, when are we pulling this off? Like, when are you hitting the trigger on this one? She's always been completely supportive when I was ready to make the jump 100% into real estate and leave the security of a 9 to 5 at the Boys and Girls Club with a 401k and a salary, and really take this risk. There was no hesitation, and it was more of like an encouragement of like, it's time for you to do this thing. You've been talking about it. And that's really been the case in all of the changes that have happened over our relationship the last decade. So, again, she's my first editor on everything I put out, whether it was the book or articles or anything else. And really, I really know that this book and a lot of what we've been able to achieve in the last decade together wouldn't be possible without her by my side. So really excited.
Tell me about the freak flag. Yeah, you're right, because you don't give off any freakiness if you read the book, know more about you.
Yeah.
You don't seem like a very freaky guy. So tell me about the freak flag flying.
Yeah, it's this idea that we usually are kind of the outliers in most rooms that we're in. Whether we're in an entrepreneurial room and people realize that, wait, you guys are married and your business partners, you guys have lost your mind, or we're in a real estate room and we're the youngest people by 30 years. So we still have this running joke of like, we're usually the freaks in the room, and we just need to embrace that and be okay with it. Because there was a period of time where I think both of us were a little bit nervous with that, with being the outliers or being the sore thumb sticking up in the crowd. And even, in our own community, there was this period of time where I really resisted this idea where we would walk into a room together or separate, and they would introduce us as the Lunas. And I used to worry for my wife, like, I want each of us to have our own identity. I don't want you to be, behind the scenes. In a lot of ways, she runs all the parts of the business that I hate doing, that I'm not great at, insurance, compliance, HR, all the things that I really need the help with, she runs. And I wanted her to have her own identity because she has her own identity, has her own personality. And at some point she reminded me of like, just let us be the freaks. It's okay. Like, I'm okay with us having this like unified, identity when it comes to our community in some ways.
Awesome. We can read all about it in Property Management Excellence, a values-based approach to real estate and property investing. His name is Anthony A. Luna. Anthony, thanks so much for the time. I appreciate it, and keep that freak flag flying.
Thanks, Joe. Appreciate it.
And that's going to do it for this episode. If you want to find out more information about Anthony and our other amazing authors, go to theauthoritycompany.com.